Hey, I'm Rob Beeler from Beeler.Tech, and I'm really excited about the start of this content collaboration I have with LiveIntent to dive into some of the key topics that are affecting publishers today. Today, we're going to talk about addressability. I think it's something that we all talk around, but we don't really talk and dive into. So I'm excited to kind of learn more and get into that. And also to really dive into how addressability is not something just for the walled gardens. It's not just for the big players, but smaller publishers can dive into it as well and make revenue now, make revenue in the future. So I think it's a core part of the strategy. And to help me with this conversation, I've got Greg Capello, who is VP of Product Marketing at LiveIntent. Greg, so glad you could join.
Thanks for having me, Rob. I appreciate it.
So I started off with a kind of comment around the idea that this isn't just kind of for the walled gardens and just for the kind of the biggest of the big publishers and so forth. Can you talk a little bit to me about addressability and what that means and why that's an opportunity?
Yeah, no, of course. I think this question comes up a lot. Like, is addressability for the big publishers, or can I do it if I'm a small publisher? And in fact, like, the answer is yes. I think all publishers, whether they're large or small, they want to know that they can not only participate, but they can succeed in this space, especially as addressability becomes more top of mind. At LiveIntent, we like to make sure that everyone even understands like what we're talking about with addressability. So how do we define that? And at its core, addressability is the ability to identify a digital audience for targeting and measurement. And that's really just how we define it and keep it simple. When we think about why it's so important now, as we head into 2025, I actually like to think about it a little bit from the consumer's perspective too. So why is addressability so important to them? Well, consumers still prefer and want a personalized experience, not just the media they're consuming, but the ads they're exposed to. So when you think about third-party cookies going away and what consumers want, you have to understand, like, this is not just a preference on the web. This is something that applies to all channels, whether it's email, web, mobile, CTV, even audio. So now as cookies go away, we have to kind of usher in this era of addressable advertising and start thinking about, well, how do we leverage first-party data, high-quality first-party data, mapped to stable consent-based IDs? And that's what's really ushering these conversations for both large publishers, small publishers, and anyone outside of the walled gardens.
So it feels like one of the things from a publisher perspective, really where to start is with a first-party data strategy. From the conversations you have and to the people that you're talking about, what makes up that first-party data strategy for publishers so they can, one, go out to market with their own product, but again, I love your word participation, right? There's an aspect of going like, there's a lot more you can tie into from a revenue perspective if you have a way of connecting to that. Can you talk a little bit about first-party data strategies?
Yeah, so there's several ways to participate, and the way to participate is to get started with something. So I think one of the ways for a publisher to get started is really to just start building out their first-party data set. And you can do that through several ways. You can do that through more user authentication. So that's driving more logins. That's driving more maybe emails through gating services. The other way to do it is through newsletter programs. How do you drive more email signups in exchange for premium content delivered to the inbox? And both of those ways will allow you to start building up that first-party data set. I think once you have that foundation of data, you then want to start activating your addressable audiences. So that's where publishers also have multiple options. They could adopt a scalable or a stable identifier like UID 2.0. Or they can work with a programmatic vendor who has identity resolution and ID bridging capabilities and get that started there and start doing more addressable advertising there. I think the important thing is to get started, as I mentioned, because even the smallest amounts of data can be helpful. So a good data provider, a trusted data provider, can help you enrich any amount of data you have, even as you're kind of ramping up that first-party set.
Yeah, it feels like I agree with you. And again, it's like you get started, you know what you know, and then you really learn what you don't know. And that's, I think, the part that gets interesting, especially because as publishers talk to buyers are looking for particular things in an audience. And while you might have a unique audience, you might not know gender, age. You may not know things that go beyond your own walls or the questions that you've asked. And that, I think, is where bridging comes into it and some of these ways of working with data providers and so forth. The bridging part, though, is kind of interesting, right? Because that's a term that kind of has been adopted and it has kind of multiple sides to it. And I don't think you're old enough to have fought in World War II or probably saw movies from the 70s, but there was a bridge too far. And there's a joke there, Greg. I don't know where it is, but there's a joke of a bridge too far.
Yeah.
Feels like there's something there. But bridging feels like it had its moment a few months ago of like, is this a good practice or not? Help us understand exactly, is bridging useful? Are there dangers? How should we think about it?
Well, luckily, I think a bridge too far is a timeless reference, so all good there.
Appreciate that.
All good there. Yeah. So is ID bridging bad? Is it good? Is it taboo? I think done correctly, no, it's fine. Done poorly, yeah, it could be bad. And I think that's where there's a lot of conversation right now. So ID bridging is having its moment. It's getting a lot of attention. Not all of it's good attention. And I think a lot of that has to do because the industry, while I think we all understand the concept of ID bridging, we're not all really talking about it the same way. At LiveIntent, we spent a lot of time talking about ID bridging not actually being something new to the ad tech industry. So you think about it, ID bridging in one form or another has been around for a long time. It's the back end of cookie syncing. It's how we've mapped IDs from the supply side to the demand side for years. And even it's kind of underpinning match tables when you look at these large identity graphs. There's a form of ID bridging in all of this. What is new, though, is the concept of ID bridging in the bid stream. And that's where I think a lot of the inconsistencies are starting to take place, because when you look at it from that context, we're not seeing everybody playing by using high-quality first-party publisher data, mapping that to stable IDs, and then sending that transparently through the bid stream. And when you do ID bridging that way, I think that's where you start thinking about, oh, this is the right way to do it. It builds trust with partners, and it ultimately is what's driving the results that we're seeing by increasing revenue lift and really monetizing audiences that have been unrecognizable for years across different browsers. So I think that's kind of where ID bridging does fit in and can be done the right way.
It's a key topic for our community and talking about that, because there's an aspect that, like, again, ID bridging and identified as such and very clear to the buy side of what it is and how that bridge was happened and what the data is, I think is providing a level of transparency that the industry needs. You want to talk about addressability, that's addressability,
yeah,
right? Where bridging to somehow figure out a way to misrepresent what you have or tie something to it to try to make things happen, I think is, again, where there's just been a lot of players that are just throwing stuff into the bid request and in the hopes of figuring out, through the inefficiencies of our marketplace, what works and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. And I like where you kind of took that just in terms of that, like, good publisher first party data, tying that trusted sources, these clean paths should start to really resonate with the buy side once they actually start to see that we're building off real data here. And some of it can be probabilistic. That's not problematic,
right,
if you've declared it as such. Right. So I think that's a key piece to it. Core to that is email. And so, and you've kind of said that from the start in terms of a publisher first party data strategy is email. How are you thinking about email at LiveIntent? Again, it's in your core, it's in your blood, if you will. But there's an aspect of going like, what are you seeing or what are you recommending to publishers think about in terms of an email/newsletter strategy? What are some of the things that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, so email and newsletters are a fantastic way to get started and really build up your first party data. And it's not just because you're ramping up, you're getting more signups, more emails subscribed to your newsletters. That's clearly one way to build up the data. The other thing we talk to publishers about is an email strategy really allows you to start building more deterministic linkages from email to web. As your readers are interacting and engaging with your content, they're clicking and they're going from one channel to the other. This is really important. When you can start tying an email hash to a first-party cookie, you then have way more deterministic data. You become less dependent on third-party data. And ultimately, the most important thing for a publisher is to have more control over their data, to find more identity resolution, increase that resolution rate for their audience. And ultimately, hopefully, that's what drives higher CPMs and more revenue to them, because it's all now connecting from their data, their resolution, and then their engaged audience. So that's one of the reasons we really do lean in heavily on newsletters, not only from LiveIntent, but when we consult with our publishers.
I mean, it feels when you say that, one of the things that kind of quickly resonates to me is, as I'm thinking as a publisher around my strategy in first party data, that again, do I need third party data sources? Do I need all this stuff? And perhaps I do. Again, I think there's going to be different scale, different size. Publishers are going to have different needs. But what you just said is, again, there's an aspect of going that there is deterministic data tied to an email address, and then being able to tie that to a first party cookie. One, the lifespan of that data goes beyond cookie churn, but it also means you can start to collect that over time. Because that, I think, is one of the biggest issues is I'm getting email addresses from people to sign up to a newsletter, but I want as little friction as possible. And so I don't want to ask them their age and gender. I did that way back in the day, Greg. No one was a fan of the multiple questions just to get a newsletter. Mm-hmm. It's get the newsletter, then figure out ways to sit there and tie more additional data. And there's other data that ties to that, right? So I think we've hit a little bit of in this addressability, right? So targeting, measurement, and then the idea again is a publisher first party data. You tie it to this, then you start to be able to work with trusted partners to kind of connect in those parts. LiveIntent has been known as a newsletter solution, as someone that knows email, but you have grown in this area as an identity solution. I'd love for you to dive in a little bit deeper into that as we think about all the stuff we talked about with bridging and so forth, because I think there's an aspect that's where therein lies the stuff I think our audience is really looking for, is understanding how this all really works. Can you dive into more detail about what you're doing?
Yeah, of course. And when you think about LiveIntent and what we've done for years, it kind of actually creates a lot of continuity as to how we landed where we are with the identity side now. So LiveIntent's always operated in email, which is a cookieless channel by nature. So for over 14 years, we've helped publishers monetize their email newsletters and creating avenues for them to gain more ad revenue through this channel that was previously unmonetized. Now we're doing that in the web through our ID bridging solution we call HERO, helping identity reveal opportunity. So a little acronym, but we like it. And what we're doing with publishers there is we're still working with them to really collect and better understand all of their first-party signals, whether that's that email hash, their ESP ID, their first-party cookie, and even logins. We take all this data and all this signal for our publishers. We run it through a publisher server through LiveIntent, but we authenticate that with our LiveIntent identity graph. And that ongoing authentication, because email is a daily activity, we're always authenticating these users and these various IDs. That ongoing authentication through our graph it's what's been enabled us to be agnostic and interoperable for the ecosystem. So when we start seeing requests from the demand side, we just have a better understanding of what that request is looking for, and then we can return an addressable user transparently in the bid stream with an ID that they recognize. So it's really what's helping tie that all together and really help publishers drive more revenue.
Right, and doesn't stick with newsletters. It goes right into a publisher's inventory on their site.
Correct. Yeah, it's their web inventory at that part. So we're basically connecting all the signal that we have from email and then on their website through first-party cookies or whatnot, and then we're able to help them monetize that on the web.
One strategy I've heard has been for publishers, again, depending on the amount of traffic they get from a newsletter, like on a daily basis, gives you a certain amount of authenticated audience, right? So if I get it as an example, a publisher might have less than 1% of their audience actually logged in at any given time. But depending on the size of your newsletter, you could go 10, 15, maybe 20%, maybe higher in terms of the actual audience that is addressable at that point on your site because the traffic came from the newsletter. To me, that's one of the quickest ways I can think to jump into that strategy so that you could start to see that, which is, I think, what most publishers right now, as we are looking at 2025, you kind of talked about, again, the future and all the, we can pontificate on how that's going to play out. Publishers need revenue now. How, is this, everything that we've talked about, something that's in place today? Is it something that, again, buyers are seeing, they get it, and are starting to transact with this piece in mind?
Yeah, so I do think the industry is starting to move in this direction. I think publishers have enough, or they should be a little bit more proactive in starting to build up this data set. Because as I mentioned earlier, even the smallest amount of data can be enriched and can help them get started. And we still are in this period of third-party signals and first-party data working in parallel. So publishers can still leverage both during this kind of interim period before third-party cookies are in fact deprecated. So, I don't think MFA sites are the answer, and I don't think, we want to go down that path for publishers to drive revenue. So I do think it has to do with, getting more first-party data, linking them to stable IDs, and then working with a partner who can help them kind of do the bridging to the demand side, where we are seeing more traction, obviously on cookieless browsers, but increasingly on still cookie-enabled browsers like Chrome.
It's interesting you brought up MFA. I kind of, you just light bulb moment here, right? Just sitting there thinking about it, that premium publishers. So again, for someone to give you an email address and give you their actual email address and an engaged email address, if you will, right? Like this is something that only really premium publishers can really ask for. An MFA is going to not be able to kind of play in this game. It feels like this is something that, again, premium publishers get to play in this space.
Yeah, I do think so. I think, premium publishers or publishers producing high quality content that readers want, readers are signing up for, readers are logging into. That's essentially who's gonna win here. And I think it does help them separate themselves in a world where, whether it's the walled gardens or search engines or AI, we can do a whole podcast on this, where they're kind of interfering within that consumer and trusted content space. They're kind of getting in the middle of it with overviews or whatnot and summaries. I do think the premium content will win out. I think premium publishers can win out. And as long as they do the work to unify this data set and really better understand their consumer, their first party, I think they can do a lot here in this world of addressability advertising.
I think you just really hit on kind of probably the key point of all of this. And I think that there is a part, as I've gone, and my group knows, I say this all the time, again, the only way to future-proof is to have a relationship with your audiences, right? And there's a part of it that, like, asking for email, getting that email is a conversion, right? It's something that means that there's now a relationship in place, and you have to respect that. But if you do that correctly, therein lies the key toward how you're actually going to build out that first-party data strategy and so forth. And then there'll be ways of enriching that and supporting that and so forth. As we kind of come to a conclusion, because I think we've covered quite a bit of ground here, Greg, some key points. Again, one of the things I like of what you said is now, start now can also equal revenue, in the short term here, to just this idea, again, of this, user or audience relationship. I think that that's kind of key. What are some of the other things in your mind that you want publishers to be thinking about right now?
So I think one thing that we kind of alluded to, but we didn't hit head on is, third-party cookies will be deprecated. As we sit here today, it'll now be consumer choice. We just don't know when that'll happen, or in which case, how that'll happen. So I do think there's a moment here where publishers can maybe advocate for themselves to make sure that the deprecation of cookies in Chrome maybe is more on a site-by-site standpoint. So consumers still have the ability to either opt in or opt out at a website level. Because again, not every website's the same, not every publisher is the same. So consumers may want more personalization on certain sites than others. We've seen this happen with ATT on Apple. So once this kind of goes into effect, adoption can happen pretty quickly, and we can see the impact of it. And then, selfishly for email, we've seen this happen with Apple MPP at an OS level. So we've seen this both at an operating system level and an app-by-app level, and we can kind of see how they both play out. So I do think that's one thing that publishers still have some time for, if they in fact are worried about how this plays out for their readers. The other thing they should do, which is kind of the parallel path, is be proactive. So start thinking about your first-party data strategy, start building that out, work with a trusted data provider to help you onboard, unify, and maybe even enrich some of your data. This way you can be better suited and better situated for addressable advertising in this first-party world, as time goes on. And obviously LiveIntent can help you do that. So there's my shameless plug, but that is part of it, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's really important, because publishers have heard for a long time the value of their publisher first-party data, right? But there's more to collecting it there is actually getting it to be activated and being able to sell it. Now, if you are able to sell certain things directly, amazing. But third-party cookies going away, or however third-party data strategies play out, that's going to come under stress. So you need to supplement that. How do you do that? ID strategy. If you have the audience that you don't know, and you don't have that kind of cookie to or whatever, trying to find ways to do that, to create something that creates that, I think is going to be, again, a part of that strategy. And from a programmatic perspective, just putting your first party data signals into the bid stream doesn't work that way. It needs to be tied to something. It needs authentication, needs validation, and so forth. And so I think that that's going to be a core part of it, of really, again, future-proofing that. So I think that's a great, again, I think we've left some seeds here for people to kind of build on and so forth, and really for us to kind of grow this series from here. So we talked about addressability this time. Greg, we'll figure out what our next topic is. I'm kind of looking forward to continue the conversation with you and the LiveIntent team to bring these topics to light. So, I should say, what if someone wants to talk to you more about Hero or to LiveIntent? Who do they talk to?
LiveIntent.com/Hero, and we get a ton of information there and some forums and all that kind of stuff. So we're happy to talk to you and get started.
I'm so good at leaving the conversion right to that last kind of moment or whatever. Anyway, thank you so much, Greg. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thanks everyone for joining. Looking forward to the next one as well.
Thanks, Rob.